Between 1950 and 1997, Woolworth's lunch counters fed America on a budget. For less than $1, you could sit on a red vinyl stool and order a complete meal: roast beef with gravy, turkey croquettes, and fried fish with tartar sauce. The prices were impossibly low. When the last Woolworths closed its doors, these meals disappeared forever. 30 forgotten dishes that once defined affordable American dining, now lost to history. 3 thick slices of slow-roasted beef sat beneath a blanket of brown gravy, the edges of the meat slightly charred from the griddle reheat. Roast beef dinner was Woolworth's most expensive lunch counter meal, sitting just 1 penny under $1. The plate arrived loaded with real mashed potatoes, whipped with butter and milk, a scoop of overcooked green beans or glazed carrots, and a slice of white bread for soaking up extra gravy. The beef was never fancy, likely bottom round or chuck roast, but it was real, not processed, and sliced to order behind the counter by cooks who'd been working the same station for decades. The gravy came from pan drippings, thickened with flour and beef stock, simmered all morning until it reached the right consistency. Nothing came from a packet or a can. For 99 cents, you got a hot, filling dinner that tasted like Sunday supper at Grandma's house, served on heavy ceramic plates that retained heat long after the food arrived. By 1997, when Woolworth's lunch counters closed for good, this kind of value and quality had become impossible to find anywhere in America. A thick slab of spiral-cut ham glistened under the lunch counter lights, its surface caramelized with brown sugar and dotted with whole cloves. Baked Virginia ham dinner cost 95 cents and delivered more pork than most people could finish in one sitting. The ham came pre-baked in large roasts each morning, then sliced thick, about half an inch, and reheated on the flat-top griddle until the edges crisped and the glaze bubbled. It was served with candied sweet potatoes that oozed orange syrup, a scoop of buttered lima beans or corn, and a warm dinner roll with a pat of margarine. The ham itself was salty, sweet, and impossibly tender, with visible marbling and a deep pink color that proved it had been properly cured and smoked. This wasn't deli-sliced lunch meat or the pale, water-injected ham sold in modern grocery stores. Woolworths bought whole bone-in hams from regional suppliers in Virginia and Kentucky, the kind stamped with state names on the label, meaning they were cured and smoked using traditional methods passed down through generations. The meat was dense, flavorful, and required actual chewing. When the lunch counters disappeared in 1997, so did this style of honest, unpretentious ham dinner. Golden brown chicken pieces sat stacked on an oval plate, steam rising from the crispy, shatteringly crunchy batter. Fried chicken plate was Woolworth's answer to Sunday dinner, available every weekday for 95 cents at the lunch counter. 2 pieces, usually a thigh and drumstick, occasionally a breast and wing, came coated in seasoned flour mixed with salt, black pepper, paprika, and a hint of cayenne, then fried in cast-iron skillets, filled with lard or vegetable shortening, heated to exactly 350 degrees. The crust shattered when you bit into it, revealing juicy meat that hadn't been brined, injected, or marinated in anything artificial. The chicken was simply seasoned and perfectly fried. It was served with creamy mayonnaise-based coleslaw, a buttermilk biscuit that crumbled at the touch, and your choice of mashed potatoes with gravy or thick-cut French fries. The chicken was never frozen. Local suppliers delivered fresh whole birds weekly, and the cooks broke them down, prepped and battered them each morning before the lunch rush began. By the time Woolworths closed in 1997, this kind of hand-battered, made-from-scratch fried chicken had become a rarity in American restaurants.
Many of you have been asking where to find these recipes. We've gathered hundreds of them from the Depression era through the 1970s in our cookbook, Grandma's Kitchen. Complete instructions, pro tips in 10 chapters. Link is in the description below. Now, let's get back to the video.
Thin slices of calf's liver lay smothered beneath a pile of caramelized onions, the whole mess swimming in rich brown gravy. The liver and onions plate cost 95 cents and was ordered almost exclusively by elderly customers and blue-collar workers who grew up eating organ meats during the Depression. The liver was soaked in milk for an hour before cooking to remove the metallic taste, then dusted with flour, salt, and pepper before being pan-fried in butter until just barely cooked through. Overcook it by even 30 seconds, and it turned into shoe leather. Woolworth's cooks knew the exact timing. The onions were sliced thick and cooked low and slow in the same pan, absorbing the liver drippings and turning sweet and golden. The plate came with mashed potatoes, green beans, and a slice of rye bread. Younger customers avoided it entirely, wrinkling their noses at the strong mineral smell that filled the lunch counter when an order went up. But for those who loved it, liver and onions represented old-fashioned cooking at its finest. By 1997, liver had disappeared from most American menus entirely, deemed too strong, too challenging, too reminiscent of poverty. An oval patty of seasoned ground beef sat drowning in thick mushroom gravy, fork tender and steaming hot. Salisbury steak with gravy cost 90 cents and was essentially a fancy hamburger without the bun, dressed up with onions, breadcrumbs, and Worcestershire sauce mixed into the meat before forming and grilling. The patty was large, about 6 ounces, and cooked on the flat-top griddle until a dark crust formed on both sides, then transferred to a shallow pan where it finished cooking in the mushroom gravy. The gravy was made from beef stock, canned mushrooms, flour, and butter, simmered until it coated the back of a spoon. It came with mashed potatoes, always mashed potatoes, never fries, and either peas or green beans, plus a dinner roll. The meal was filling, cheap, and tasted like home cooking, which was exactly what Woolworths aimed for. Salisbury steak wasn't trying to be gourmet, it was trying to be dinner. The dish was named after Dr. James Salisbury, a physician who promoted ground beef as health food in the 1890s. By 1997, it had become a TV dinner punchline, but at Woolworth's, it was still a legitimate, respectable lunch. These 5 meals, roast beef, ham, fried chicken, liver, and Salisbury steak, represented Woolworth's commitment to real cooking at impossible prices. Every plate was made from scratch, nothing prepackaged or microwaved. By the mid-1990s, that model couldn't compete with fast food. The next 5 meals show why America mourned when Woolworths disappeared. A thin piece of pounded veal lay golden and crispy on the plate, breaded with Italian-style breadcrumbs and fried until it crackled. Breaded veal cutlet dinner cost 89 cents and was Woolworth's nod to Italian-American cooking, popular in neighborhoods with large immigrant populations. The veal was pounded flat with a meat mallet until it was nearly translucent, then dredged in flour, dipped in beaten egg, and coated with seasoned breadcrumbs mixed with Parmesan cheese, garlic powder, and dried parsley. It was fried in clarified butter until the coating turned deep golden brown and the edges curled slightly. The cutlet was served with a lemon wedge for squeezing, a side of spaghetti with marinara sauce, and a small iceberg lettuce salad with Italian dressing. Some locations offered it Parmigiana style for an extra dime, which meant adding marinara and melted mozzarella on top. The veal itself was mild and tender, almost buttery in texture, a far cry from the tough, gamey meat most people associated with wild game. By 1997, veal had fallen out of favor due to animal welfare concerns, and few restaurants still served it. Chunks of beef, carrots, potatoes, and onions floated in thick brown gravy, served steaming hot in a deep bowl. Beef stew plate cost 85 cents and was the lunch counter's cold weather staple, appearing on menus from October through March. The stew was made in massive stock pots every morning, starting with cubed chuck roast that was browned in batches, then simmered for hours with beef stock, tomato paste, and bay leaves until the meat fell apart at the touch of a spoon. Carrots and potatoes were added in the last hour so they didn't disintegrate into mush. The result was a rich, hearty stew that tasted like it had been cooking all day, because it had. It came with 2 thick slices of white bread for dipping, or sometimes cornbread if the cook was feeling generous. The stew was never fancy, never seasoned with wine or exotic herbs, just salt, pepper, and thyme. It was comfort food in its purest form, the kind of meal that warmed you from the inside out on a freezing January afternoon. By 1997, most restaurants had replaced slow-cooked stews with microwaved soups from industrial suppliers. 2 golden fillets of whitefish lay side by side, their batter crispy and greaseless, with a lemon wedge perched on the edge of the plate. Fried fish dinner cost 79 cents and was the Friday special at every Woolworth's in America, a holdover from Catholic tradition when meat was forbidden on Fridays. The fish was usually cod, haddock, or pollock, depending on what was cheapest that week, delivered fresh or frozen in large blocks, and cut into portion-sized fillets by the morning crew. It was battered in a simple mix of flour, cornmeal, salt, and beer, then deep-fried in vegetable oil until the coating puffed up and turned golden. The result was light, flaky fish with a crunchy exterior that didn't taste greasy or heavy. It came with French fries, coleslaw, a slice of white bread, and a small cup of tartar sauce made from mayonnaise, chopped pickles, and lemon juice. Some locations offered malt vinegar on request. The fish was never overcooked or rubbery, a testament to the skill of cooks who fried hundreds of orders every Friday. By 1997, fried fish had become synonymous with fast food chains, but Woolworth's version was leagues better. A golden pastry crust topped a ceramic bowl filled with chunks of chicken, peas, carrots, and potatoes, swimming in creamy white sauce. Chicken pot pie cost 75 cents and was made from scratch every morning in individual portions, not scooped from a giant pan like cafeteria food. The filling started with leftover roasted chicken, Woolworths wasted nothing, that was shredded and combined with diced vegetables, chicken stock, heavy cream, flour, and butter to create a thick, velvety sauce. The mixture was spooned into small ceramic bowls, topped with a round of pie crust, brushed with egg wash, and baked until the crust puffed and turned deep golden brown. The result was a miniature pot pie that required a few minutes of cooling before you could dig in, or risk burning the roof of your mouth on molten gravy. It came with no sides, because it didn't need any. The pot pie itself was a complete meal. The crust was flaky and buttery. The filling was rich and comforting, and the vegetables were cooked just enough to be tender without turning to mush. By 1997, pot pies had become frozen TV dinners, but Woolworth's version reminded people why the dish was beloved. A thick slice of meatloaf sat on the plate, its top glazed with ketchup that had caramelized in the oven. Meatloaf dinner cost 65 cents and was the epitome of American home cooking, translated to the lunch counter. The meatloaf was made in giant loaf pans every morning using ground beef, ground pork, breadcrumbs soaked in milk, diced onions, eggs, salt, pepper, and Worcestershire sauce, all mixed by hand and packed tightly to prevent crumbling. The top was slathered with ketchup mixed with brown sugar and a splash of vinegar, then baked until the glaze turned dark and sticky. Each slice was about an inch thick, dense and savory, with visible chunks of onion throughout. It was served with mashed potatoes, brown gravy, green beans or corn, and a dinner roll. The meatloaf was never dry or crumbly like the school cafeteria version. Woolworth's recipe included enough fat and moisture to keep it tender and juicy. Some customers ordered an extra slice to take home for dinner, wrapped in wax paper and tucked into a small paper bag. By 1997, meatloaf had become retro kitsch, but at Woolworth's it was simply good, honest food. These first 10 meals, from 99-cent roast beef to 65-cent meatloaf, proved that Woolworth's delivered real value. Every plate was home-cooked quality at Depression-era prices. But the next 10 dishes reveal the true hidden gems, regional specialties, ethnic-inspired creations, and forgotten favorites that only the regulars knew to order. Keep watching. Slices of white and dark meat turkey were fanned across the plate, glistening with pan juices and dotted with herbs. Roast turkey dinner cost 65 cents at Woolworth's lunch counter and brought Thanksgiving to any Tuesday afternoon. Whole turkeys were roasted overnight in commercial ovens, basted every hour with butter and chicken stock until the skin turned mahogany brown and the meat pulled away from the bone with minimal effort. The next morning, cooks carved the birds by hand, separating breast meat from thighs and drumsticks, keeping everything warm in shallow pans filled with more pan drippings. Each dinner plate received 3 to 4 slices of mixed turkey, a generous ladle of sage-flecked gravy made from the roasting pan fond, a mound of bread stuffing studded with celery and onions, mashed potatoes, and cranberry sauce straight from the can, served with the ridges still visible. The turkey was never dry, never flavorless, never the pale, factory-farmed poultry that dominates modern supermarkets. It was real turkey, brined and seasoned, roasted low and slow, until the meat was tender and the drippings were rich enough to make proper gravy. Some customers ordered turkey dinner twice a week, every week, for years. It was reliable, comforting, and tasted exactly the same every single time. By 1997, when Woolworth's closed, the tradition of year-round roast turkey dinners had nearly vanished from American restaurants, replaced by sandwich shops selling processed deli turkey on white bread. Golden brown cylinders of breaded, deep-fried turkey sat upright on the plate like little soldiers, crispy on the outside and creamy within. Turkey croquettes cost 55 cents and were Woolworth's genius solution for using up leftover turkey from the roast turkey dinners. The filling was a mixture of finely chopped turkey meat, mashed potatoes, diced celery, onions, and a thick white sauce made from butter, flour, and chicken stock, seasoned with salt, pepper, and a pinch of nutmeg. This mixture was chilled overnight until firm, then shaped into small logs about 3 inches long and 1 inch thick. Each croquette was rolled in flour, dipped in beaten egg, coated with fine breadcrumbs, and deep-fried in hot oil until the exterior turned crispy and golden, while the interior stayed soft and hot. 3 croquettes came per order, arranged in a triangle on the plate, served with mashed potatoes, turkey gravy, and either green peas or buttered carrots. The texture was the star of the dish, that perfect contrast between the crunchy coating and the smooth, almost mousse-like filling. Cutting into a croquette released a puff of steam and the savory aroma of turkey and herbs. It was comfort food elevated just slightly above the everyday, a way to make yesterday's roast turkey feel special again. By the 1980s, croquettes had fallen out of fashion, deemed too labor-intensive and old-fashioned for modern menus. When Woolworth's disappeared, so did this nearly forgotten preparation. 2 slices of white bread lay flat on the plate, topped with warm turkey slices and completely smothered in thick gravy. Hot turkey sandwich cost 50 cents and was one of Woolworth's most popular quick lunches, ordered by office workers on their 30-minute breaks and shoppers taking a rest between errands. The sandwich was assembled in stages. First, 2 slices of soft white bread were placed side by side on a warm plate. Then, several slices of freshly carved turkey, usually the less attractive pieces that couldn't be used for the turkey dinner plate, were laid across the bread. Finally, the whole thing was buried under a cascade of hot turkey gravy, so much that the bread became completely soaked and started to fall apart under the weight of the liquid. The result was less a sandwich and more a gravy-soaked casserole that had to be eaten with a knife and fork. It came with a side of mashed potatoes or fries and a scoop of cranberry sauce. The bread dissolved into the gravy, the turkey was tender and mild, and the whole thing tasted like the best part of Thanksgiving dinner condensed into a single plate. Some customers requested extra gravy on the side, pouring it over the potatoes or dipping their fries into it. Hot turkey sandwich was pure comfort, pure nostalgia, pure simplicity. By 1997, the dish had become a rarity, found only in a handful of old-fashioned diners still clinging to mid-century traditions. A mound of stir-fried vegetables and meat sat piled over crispy fried noodles, with a soft dinner roll on the side. Chow mein with warm rolls cost 60 cents and represented Woolworth's attempt at exotic cuisine, though it bore little resemblance to authentic Chinese cooking. The dish was pure American Chinese fusion, developed in the early 1900s and popularized by canned chow mein sold in supermarkets. Woolworth's version was made fresh each day. Chicken or pork was sliced thin and stir-fried with onions, celery, and bean sprouts in a large wok or flat-top griddle, then tossed with a brown sauce made from soy sauce, beef stock, cornstarch, and a touch of sugar. The mixture was served over crunchy fried chow mein noodles, the kind that came in a can, which softened slightly under the hot sauce but retained some crunch. The warm dinner roll was an odd but traditional accompaniment, a nod to American preference for bread with every meal, even Asian-inspired ones. The flavor was salty, slightly sweet, and deeply savory, with the vegetables still crisp and the meat tender. It wasn't Chinese food, but it wasn't trying to be. It was American lunch counter food dressed in Chinese clothing, and customers loved it for exactly what it was. By the 1980s, chow mein had become a punchline, associated with cheap takeout and school cafeteria meals. Woolworth's version, elbow macaroni, swam in a thick, tomato-based sauce loaded with green bell peppers and topped with melted cheddar cheese. Creole macaroni cost 60 cents and was a regional specialty that appeared on Woolworth's menus primarily in southern locations, though a few northern stores carried it as well. The dish was a distant cousin of baked macaroni and cheese, but instead of a creamy white sauce, it featured a bold, slightly spicy tomato base made from crushed tomatoes, diced onions, chopped green peppers, garlic, paprika, cayenne pepper, salt, and black pepper. The macaroni was boiled until tender, drained, and mixed with the sauce, then transferred to a baking dish, topped with shredded sharp cheddar cheese, and baked until the cheese melted and turned golden brown around the edges. The result was a hearty, flavorful casserole that tasted like a cross between goulash and mac and cheese, with a hint of heat from the cayenne. It came with a slice of garlic bread or a dinner roll for soaking up the sauce. The peppers added texture and a slight bitterness that cut through the richness of the cheese and the acidity of the tomatoes. Creole macaroni was filling, cheap, and distinctly American despite its French-inspired name. By 1997, the dish had vanished from most menus, remembered only by those who grew up eating it at Woolworth's lunch counters in Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama. From roast turkey to Creole macaroni, these 5 meals showcased Woolworth's ability to serve both traditional comfort food and regional specialties at unbeatable prices. Every dish was made from scratch, served hot, and priced for working-class families. The next 5 meals reveal even more forgotten flavors that defined the lunch counter era. A tangle of spaghetti noodles lay coiled on the plate, blanketed in a rich, meaty red sauce and dusted with grated Parmesan cheese. Spaghetti with meat sauce cost 59 cents and was Woolworth's answer to Italian-American family dining, scaled down to lunch counter portions. The sauce was made every morning in huge stock pots, starting with ground beef browned in olive oil with diced onions and minced garlic. Once the meat was cooked through, crushed tomatoes, tomato paste, dried oregano, basil, bay leaves, salt, pepper, and a pinch of sugar were added. Then the whole mixture was left to simmer for at least 2 hours until the flavors melded and the sauce thickened to the right consistency. The spaghetti was cooked to order, boiled in salted water until al dente, drained, and tossed with a ladle of the meat sauce. It was served in a shallow bowl or on a dinner plate, topped with more sauce, a sprinkle of Parmesan, and a slice of garlic bread on the side. The sauce was hearty and deeply flavored, with visible chunks of ground beef and a slight sweetness from the tomatoes. It wasn't gourmet Italian cuisine, but it was honest, filling, and satisfying. By the 1990s, spaghetti had become synonymous with cheap chain restaurants like Olive Garden, but Woolworth's version reminded customers of homemade Sunday dinners, cooked slowly and served with care. 2 plump hot dogs lay side by side on a bed of baked beans, the whole thing steaming and fragrant with molasses and brown sugar. Frankfurter dinner cost 50 cents and was marketed as a children's meal, though plenty of adults ordered it for themselves when money was tight or they wanted something simple and comforting. The hot dogs were all beef franks, not the mystery meat variety sold at ballparks, boiled or griddled until the casings split and the insides were piping hot. The baked beans were slow-cooked navy beans in a thick sauce made from molasses, brown sugar, ketchup, mustard, and diced bacon or salt pork, baked for hours until the beans were creamy and the sauce was dark and sticky. The hot dogs were nestled into the beans, not on buns, so the dish was eaten with a knife and fork. It came with a slice of white bread and a pickle spear on the side. The combination of salty hot dogs and sweet beans was a classic pairing, beloved by kids and Depression-era adults who remembered stretching meat with inexpensive beans. The meal was filling, cheap, and nostalgic, a reminder of simpler times when dinner didn't need to be fancy to be good. By 1997, the idea of serving hot dogs on beans had become a relic, replaced by corn dogs and fast food burgers. A scoop of tender elbow macaroni sat on the plate, coated in a simple, creamy sauce and topped with toasted breadcrumbs. Baked macaroni cost 45 cents and was the plainest, most straightforward version of mac and cheese Woolworths offered, appealing to children, picky eaters, and anyone who wanted a cheap, filling lunch. The dish was made in large baking pans each morning. Cooked macaroni was mixed with a basic white sauce made from butter, flour, and milk, seasoned with just salt, white pepper, and a small amount of grated cheddar cheese, not enough to make it orange, just enough to add a hint of flavor. The mixture was poured into pans, topped with buttered breadcrumbs, and baked until the top turned golden and crunchy. Each serving was a generous scoop, served plain with no sides, though you could add a side of green beans or corn for an extra dime. The macaroni was soft, almost mushy by modern standards, and the sauce was mild and comforting, like something a grandmother would make for a sick child. It wasn't fancy, it wasn't exciting, but it was exactly what it needed to be: warm, filling, and cheap. By the 1990s, boxed Kraft macaroni and cheese had trained Americans to expect bright orange noodles and artificial cheese flavor, making Woolworth's pale, mild version seem bland by comparison. But for those who remembered it, baked macaroni was pure comfort. A thick, hearty soup filled the bowl, pale beans and chunks of ham floating in a creamy, smoky broth. Ham and bean soup with crackers cost 40 cents and was one of the cheapest full meals Woolworths offered, popular with customers on tight budgets and elderly diners who preferred soft, easy-to-eat foods. The soup was made from dried navy beans that were soaked overnight, then simmered for hours with a ham hock diced onions, celery, carrots, bay leaves, and black pepper until the beans broke down and thickened the broth naturally. The ham hock was removed, the meat was pulled off and chopped, then stirred back into the soup. The result was a thick, almost stew-like soup that was filling enough to be a meal on its own. It came with a sleeve of saltine crackers and a slice of white bread. Some customers crumbled the crackers directly into the soup, thickening it even more and adding a salty crunch. Others used the bread to soak up the broth, turning the soup into a kind of porridge. The flavor was smoky, savory, and slightly sweet from the beans, with tender chunks of ham in every spoonful. Ham and bean soup was peasant food, depression food, survival food. But at Woolworth's, it was served with dignity and care. By 1997, this kind of slow-cooked, from-scratch soup had been replaced by canned versions and microwaved instant meals. A large, ripe tomato sat on a bed of iceberg lettuce, its top cut off and the insides hollowed out, filled to overflowing with creamy tuna salad. Stuffed tomato with tuna salad cost 50 cents and was Woolworth's most popular, light lunch option, ordered primarily by women who wanted something filling but not heavy, refreshing but not just a salad. The tomatoes were beefsteak varieties, firm enough to hold their shape but ripe enough to be sweet and juicy. The tuna salad was made fresh every morning using canned tuna. Woolworths went through cases of it daily. Mayonnaise, finely diced celery for crunch, minced onion, a squeeze of lemon juice, salt, and black pepper. The mixture was creamy but not soupy, packed tightly into the hollowed tomato until it formed a mound on top. It was served cold on a chilled plate, garnished with lettuce leaves, a few cucumber slices, and saltine crackers on the side. The combination of cold, creamy tuna and sweet, acidic tomato was refreshing and satisfying, especially on hot summer days when heavy meals felt oppressive. Some customers added a sprinkle of paprika or a dash of hot sauce to the tuna salad for extra flavor. Stuffed tomatoes were a staple of mid-century ladies' luncheons, tea rooms, and department store restaurants. But by 1997, they had become a relic of a more genteel era. 20 meals down, 10 to go. From roast beef dinners to stuffed tomatoes, Woolworth's lunch counters offered something for everyone, at prices that seem impossible today. But the final 10 dishes are the rarest of all: forgotten sandwiches, comfort classics, and budget meals that vanished when the red vinyl stools disappeared forever. A plump, crimson tomato sat centered on the plate, its top removed like a lid and its insides scooped clean, now overflowing with chunky chicken salad that spilled over the sides. Stuffed tomato with chicken salad cost 50 cents and was the slightly more elegant cousin to the tuna version, ordered by customers who wanted white meat poultry instead of canned fish. The preparation was nearly identical. Large beefsteak tomatoes were chosen for their size and firmness, chilled until cold, then carefully hollowed out with a spoon, leaving the walls intact but thin enough to cut through easily with a fork. The chicken salad filling was made from scratch, using leftover roasted chicken from the previous day's hot meals, breast meat primarily, though some dark meat was included for moisture and flavor. The chicken was diced into small cubes, not shredded, and mixed with mayonnaise, finely chopped celery for crunch, a small amount of minced onion, a squeeze of fresh lemon juice, salt, white pepper, and occasionally a pinch of dried tarragon or dill for a subtle herbal note. Some locations added halved red grapes or chopped walnuts to the mixture, though this was not standard across all Woolworths. The chicken salad was packed tightly into the tomato cavity until it mounded above the opening. Then the whole thing was placed on a bed of crisp iceberg lettuce leaves, garnished with cucumber slices, a wedge of lemon, and accompanied by a small handful of saltine crackers or Melba toast. The combination of cool, creamy chicken salad and the sweet, juicy acidity of the ripe tomato was refreshing and light, perfect for summer lunches or for customers who wanted a substantial meal without the heaviness of hot food. The dish was visually appealing, almost fancy by lunch counter standards, which made it popular for ladies' luncheons and business meetings where women wanted to eat well but not appear too hungry or too casual. By the 1980s, stuffed tomatoes had become associated with outdated gender norms and retro cooking, dismissed as ladies' food or old-fashioned diet fare. When Woolworths closed in 1997, the stuffed tomato disappeared from most American menus, surviving only in a handful of old-fashioned tea rooms and nostalgic diners that catered to elderly customers who remembered when this was a standard, respectable lunch option. Thick slices of pink, peppery corned beef were piled high between two pieces of rye bread, the meat still steaming from the steam table. Hot corned beef sandwich cost 75 cents and was a staple at Woolworth's locations in cities with large Jewish populations, particularly in New York, Chicago, Philadelphia, and Boston. The corned beef was purchased pre-cooked in large briskets from local delis or meat suppliers, delivered twice weekly, and kept warm in shallow pans filled with their own juices. When an order came in, the cook sliced the corned beef by hand, never with a machine, which would make it too thin, cutting thick slabs about a quarter-inch each, then piling 6 to 8 slices onto seeded rye bread that had been lightly toasted on the griddle with butter. The sandwich was served open-faced or closed, depending on the location, with a dill pickle spear, a small pile of coleslaw, and yellow mustard on the side. Some customers requested Swiss cheese melted on top, turning it into a makeshift Reuben without the sauerkraut. The corned beef itself was salty, peppery, and incredibly tender, with visible marbling of fat that melted on the tongue. It was not the same as the thinly sliced, dried-out deli meat sold in supermarkets. This was real, hand-cut corned beef, with flavor and texture. The sandwich was messy, requiring both hands and multiple napkins, and it was impossible to eat without getting mustard on your fingers or pickle juice on your shirt. But it was worth every bit of the mess. The sandwich was filling enough to be dinner, substantial enough to satisfy even the hungriest worker, and flavorful enough to justify the 75-cent price tag, which was on the higher end for Woolworths. By the 1990s, hot corned beef sandwiches had become the domain of Jewish delis and specialty sandwich shops, priced at $8 to $12 instead of 75 cents. Woolworth's version was a reminder of when working-class people could afford real deli meat, not just processed lunch meat from a plastic package. Slabs of dark, spice-crusted pastrami were layered onto rye bread, the meat glistening with rendered fat and fragrant with black pepper and coriander. Hot pastrami sandwich cost 75 cents and appeared on Woolworth's menus primarily in urban locations, where delis and Jewish food culture were prominent. Pastrami, like corned beef, was purchased pre-smoked and pre-cooked from specialty suppliers, delivered in whole brisket form, and kept warm in steam tables until sliced to order. The meat was cut thick, always by hand, never pressed into uniform slices by a machine. Each sandwich received a generous pile of pastrami, at least 5 or 6 thick slices, stacked between 2 pieces of seeded rye bread that had been lightly buttered and toasted on the flat-top griddle until the crust was golden and slightly crispy. The sandwich was served with a dill pickle, coleslaw, and spicy brown mustard on the side, though purists insisted that mustard should be applied directly to the meat, not the bread. Pastrami had a more complex flavor than corned beef. The smoking process added a deep, almost smoky sweetness, while the spice rub, primarily black pepper, coriander, garlic, and paprika, created a savory, peppery crust that contrasted with the tender, fatty interior. The meat was rich, almost overwhelming in its intensity, and a single sandwich was enough to fill you up for hours. Some customers ordered it with Swiss cheese melted on top, or asked for sauerkraut to be added, turning it into an improvised Reuben. Others ordered it plain, believing that anything added to pastrami was an insult to the meat itself. Hot pastrami sandwiches were iconic New York deli food, but Woolworths brought them to mainstream America, making them accessible to people who had never set foot in a kosher deli. By 1997, pastrami had become expensive and niche, found only in specialty delis that charged $15 or more for a sandwich. Woolworth's 75-cent version was a relic of a time when immigrant foods were still affordable. Thin slices of rare roast beef were folded onto white bread, layered with lettuce, tomato, and mayonnaise, served cold and cut diagonally. Cold roast beef sandwich cost 75 cents and was ordered by customers who wanted something substantial but didn't want hot food on a summer day. The roast beef was the same cut used for the hot roast beef dinner, usually bottom round or sirloin tip, roasted overnight until medium rare, then chilled completely before being sliced paper-thin on an electric slicer. The beef was pinkish-red in the center, with a thin gray outer layer, where it had been seared, and it was tender enough to bite through easily without tearing the bread. The sandwich was built on 2 slices of fresh white bread, lightly spread with mayonnaise, then layered with roast beef, crisp iceberg lettuce, thick slices of ripe tomato, and a sprinkle of salt and pepper. It was cut corner to corner, creating 2 triangular halves that were easier to handle, and served with a handful of potato chips and a pickle spear on the side. The sandwich was simple but satisfying, with the mild flavor of the roast beef, complemented by the sweetness of the tomato and the richness of the mayonnaise. Some customers requested horseradish sauce instead of mayo, adding a sharp, spicy kick that elevated the sandwich into something more interesting. Others added onions, cheese, or mustard, customizing it to their taste. Cold roast beef sandwiches were a lunchtime staple at delis and diners across America, but Woolworth's version was notable for its generous portions and low price. By the 1990s, roast beef had become synonymous with Arby's and fast food chains, but Woolworths used real, hand-sliced beef, not processed meat formed into a loaf and steamed. Slices of tender roast beef were arranged on white bread, drenched in hot brown gravy, and served open-faced with a side of mashed potatoes. Hot roast beef sandwich cost 70 cents and was nearly identical to the hot turkey sandwich in preparation and presentation, but with beef instead of poultry. The roast beef was sliced from the same roasts used for the roast beef dinner plate, cut slightly thicker than the cold sandwich version, about 1/8 of an inch, and kept warm in a shallow pan filled with beef stock and pan drippings. 2 slices of soft white bread were laid flat on a warm plate, slightly overlapping, and several slices of roast beef were arranged on top, covering the bread completely. Then the entire thing was smothered in hot brown gravy made from beef stock, pan drippings, flour, and butter, cooked until thick and glossy. The gravy soaked into the bread immediately, turning it soft and almost pudding-like, and pooled around the edges of the plate. A scoop of mashed potatoes was added to the side, and the customer could request extra gravy to pour over the potatoes as well. The sandwich, or more accurately, the open-faced beef plate, was eaten with a knife and fork, not by hand, and required careful attention to avoid spilling gravy everywhere. The flavor was rich, beefy, and deeply savory, with the soft bread acting as a sponge for all that delicious gravy. It was comfort food at its most basic and its best, the kind of meal that warmed you from the inside and made you feel satisfied in a way that fancy restaurants never could. Hot roast beef sandwiches were common in diners and cafeterias throughout the mid-20th century, but by the 1990s they had become rare, replaced by pressed panini sandwiches and gourmet wraps. Woolworth's version was a reminder of when sandwich didn't always mean something you could pick up with your hands. 25 meals gone, 5 left. These sandwiches, hot corned beef, pastrami, roast beef, proved that Woolworth's wasn't just cheap, it was good. Real meat, hand-sliced, served hot and generous. The final 5 dishes show why loyal customers kept coming back, year after year, until the very last lunch counter closed. Several thick slices of baked ham lay across white bread, glistening with a sweet glaze and covered in a thin, golden gravy. The hot ham sandwich cost 65 cents and followed the same open-faced format as the hot turkey and hot roast beef versions, but with ham as the star. The ham used for this sandwich was the same spiral-cut, bone-in ham served in the baked Virginia ham dinner, roasted with a brown sugar and clove glaze until the exterior caramelized and the interior stayed moist and tender. After the dinner service rush, leftover ham was sliced thick, about a 1/4 inch each, and kept warm in a pan with a little pineapple juice or apple cider to prevent it from drying out. When an order came in, 2 slices of soft white bread were placed on a warm plate, and 3 to 4 slices of ham were layered on top, overlapping slightly. Then the whole thing was blanketed in a thin, sweet gravy made from the ham drippings, pineapple juice, brown sugar, a touch of mustard, and cornstarch to thicken it. The gravy was lighter and sweeter than the beef or turkey versions, more like a glaze than a traditional brown gravy, and it soaked into the bread quickly, turning it soft and slightly sweet. A scoop of mashed potatoes or sweet potato casserole was served on the side, and some locations offered a pineapple ring as a garnish, leaning into the retro ham and pineapple pairing that was wildly popular in the 1950s and 60s. The sandwich was sweet, salty, and comforting, with the ham providing a meaty richness and the sweet gravy adding a dessert-like quality that some people loved and others found too cloying. Hot ham sandwiches were a staple of church potlucks, school cafeterias, and diner menus throughout the mid-century, but they faded from popularity as tastes shifted away from sweet and savory combinations. By 1997, the idea of covering ham with sweet gravy seemed bizarre to younger generations raised on dry deli ham and honey-baked hams from specialty stores. Woolworth's version was a time capsule, a reminder of when American tastes embraced sweetness in unexpected places. A beef patty was sandwiched between 2 slices of buttered griddled rye bread, oozing with melted Swiss cheese and caramelized onions. Patty melt cost 55 cents and was Woolworth's answer to customers who wanted a burger but were tired of the standard hamburger on a bun format. The patty was made from the same ground beef used for hamburgers and Salisbury steak, formed into a thin, oval shape that matched the dimensions of a slice of rye bread. The patty was seasoned simply with salt and pepper, then cooked on the flat-top griddle until a dark crust formed on both sides. While the patty cooked, sliced onions were caramelized in butter on the same griddle until they turned soft, sweet, and golden brown. 2 slices of seeded rye bread were buttered on one side and placed butter side down on the griddle to toast. Once the bread was golden, a slice of Swiss cheese was placed on one piece, the cooked patty was placed on top, a pile of caramelized onions was added, another slice of Swiss cheese was layered on, and the second piece of toasted rye was placed on top to complete the sandwich. The whole thing was pressed down with a spatula to help the cheese melt and bind everything together, then cut diagonally and served with a pickle and a handful of potato chips. The result was a greasy, melty, onion-packed masterpiece that combined the best elements of a burger and a grilled cheese. The rye bread added a slightly sour, earthy flavor that contrasted beautifully with the sweet onions and the nutty, mild Swiss cheese. The beef patty was thin and crispy around the edges, with a juicy center that released its fat into the bread, making every bite rich and satisfying. Patty melts were invented in California in the 1940s and quickly spread across the country, becoming a diner staple. Woolworth's version was simple, classic, and perfectly executed. By the 1990s, patty melts had fallen out of fashion, overshadowed by gourmet burgers and trendy sandwiches. But they've experienced a recent revival, as people rediscover the joys of simple, greasy diner food. Finely chopped ham mixed with mayonnaise and pickles was spread between 2 slices of white bread, simple and unpretentious. Ham salad sandwich cost 30 cents and was one of the cheapest items on the Woolworth's menu, popular with kids, elderly customers on fixed incomes, and anyone looking for a quick, light lunch that wouldn't break the bank. The ham salad was made from leftover baked ham that couldn't be used for hot sandwiches or dinner plates. End pieces, scraps, bits that were too small to slice, and trimmed edges that would otherwise be thrown away. These pieces were chopped finely by hand with a sharp knife or run through a meat grinder until the ham resembled coarse ground meat, with some texture remaining but small enough to spread easily. The chopped ham was then mixed with mayonnaise, finely diced celery for crunch, sweet pickle relish for a touch of sweetness and acidity, a small amount of yellow mustard to add tang, and a pinch of black pepper for subtle heat. Some locations added a tiny bit of minced onion or a dash of paprika, but the basic recipe remained consistent across all Woolworths. The result was a creamy, sweet-savory spread that was similar in texture to tuna salad or chicken salad, but with the distinct flavor of cured, smoked ham that set it apart from other sandwich spreads. The sandwich was assembled simply: 2 slices of fresh white bread, a generous scoop of ham salad spread evenly across one slice with a knife or spatula, the other slice placed carefully on top, then the whole thing cut in half, either diagonally or straight down the middle, depending on the preference of the server. It was served on a small plate with a pickle spear and a handful of potato chips. Nothing fancy, nothing elaborate, just the basics that accompanied every sandwich on the menu. The flavor was mild and approachable, slightly sweet from the pickle relish, salty from the ham and the curing process, with the mayonnaise providing richness and moisture that kept the sandwich from being dry. The celery added a pleasant crunch that contrasted with the soft bread and creamy filling. Ham salad sandwiches were a Depression-era invention, born from necessity during a time when nothing was wasted and every scrap of meat was stretched as far as possible. They were never glamorous, never exciting, never the kind of thing you'd see on a restaurant menu today. But they were cheap, filling, and nostalgic, carrying with them the memory of hard times and resourceful cooking. By the 1990s, ham salad had largely disappeared from menus, deemed too old-fashioned, too reminiscent of poverty cooking, and too unappealing to younger generations who had never experienced true scarcity. But for those who grew up eating it at Woolworth's or in their grandmother's kitchen, ham salad sandwiches represented a simpler time when food was about sustenance and thrift, not presentation or Instagram photos. 2 slices of American cheese were placed between 2 slices of white bread. Nothing more, nothing less. The American cheese sandwich cost 25 cents and was the ultimate budget meal, ordered by children with pocket change, by people who were completely broke, or by customers who simply wanted the plainest, most inoffensive lunch possible, without any surprises or strong flavors. The sandwich was made exactly as described, with no embellishments or hidden ingredients. 2 slices of soft, fresh white bread, usually Wonder Bread or a similar mass-produced brand known for its pillowy texture and slight sweetness, and 2 slices of individually wrapped American cheese, the kind that came in a stack in the refrigerator and had to be carefully peeled out of the plastic wrapper to avoid tearing. No butter, no mayo, no mustard, no lettuce or tomato unless you specifically requested them and paid an extra nickel or dime. Just bread and cheese, the most basic sandwich imaginable. Some customers requested it toasted, which transformed it into a basic grilled cheese with slightly crispy bread and melted cheese. But the standard version was served cold, untoasted, and utterly plain, assembled in seconds, and delivered to the counter without ceremony. It came with the same accompaniments as every other sandwich: a pickle spear, and a small pile of potato chips. The standard sides that appeared regardless of whether you paid 25 cents or 75 cents. The flavor was mild, almost bland by modern standards, with the soft, slightly sweet bread and the creamy, salty cheese blending together into a familiar, comforting taste that required no effort to eat or enjoy. There was nothing challenging about it, nothing that would offend a picky eater or a sensitive stomach. It was safe, predictable, and boring in the best possible way. American cheese sandwiches were the food of last resort, the thing you ordered when you had exactly a quarter in your pocket and desperately needed something to fill your stomach until dinner. They were also the food of childhood, the thing mothers packed in school lunchboxes 5 days a week because it was cheap, easy to make in bulk, and unlikely to be rejected or traded away. At Woolworth's, the American cheese sandwich represented the absolute floor of the lunch counter menu, the cheapest, simplest, most humble item available, the rock-bottom option for anyone who needed a meal but had almost no money. But even though it cost only a quarter, it was still served with the same care and attention as the 99-cent roast beef dinner, placed on a real ceramic plate, brought to your seat by a real waitress in a uniform, and eaten with real silverware, not plastic forks or paper napkins. That dignity mattered. By 1997, a 25-cent sandwich seemed absurd, impossible, laughable, a relic of a bygone era when food was cheap and businesses could afford to serve meals at almost no profit just to get people through the door. Crisp lettuce and thick tomato slices were layered between white bread with a smear of mayonnaise, the cheapest sandwich Woolworths offered. Lettuce and tomato sandwich cost 20 cents, a single coin, 2 dimes, and was ordered primarily by elderly women on fixed Social Security incomes, by customers who weren't very hungry and just wanted a light snack, or by vegetarians at a time when vegetarianism was rare, misunderstood, and often met with suspicion or mockery. The sandwich was assembled quickly and efficiently. 2 slices of fresh white bread, a thin layer of mayonnaise spread carefully on both slices to keep the bread from getting soggy, 2 or 3 leaves of crisp iceberg lettuce that had been washed and dried, and 2 thick slices of ripe red tomato, preferably beefsteak or another large variety, seasoned with a generous sprinkle of salt and freshly cracked black pepper to enhance the natural sweetness of the tomato. The bread was pressed down gently to compact the ingredients and make the sandwich easier to handle, then cut diagonally into 2 triangles and served on a small plate with a pickle spear and a few potato chips on the side. The flavor was light, fresh, and summery, with the juicy sweetness of the tomato contrasting beautifully with the cool, mild crunch of the lettuce and the richness of the mayonnaise. It was refreshing, almost spa-like in its simplicity, the kind of thing you might eat on a hot afternoon when the thought of heavy, greasy food was unappealing. But it was not a filling sandwich, not a satisfying sandwich, not a sandwich that would sustain you through an afternoon of physical labor or keep hunger at bay for more than an hour or 2. It was barely a meal at all, more of a snack or an appetizer, something to tide you over until you could afford something more substantial. But for 20 cents, it was better than nothing, and for some people, nothing was the only alternative. Lettuce and tomato sandwiches were the ultimate expression of Depression-era frugality, a way to make a meal out of vegetables and bread when meat was too expensive, unavailable, or being saved for someone else in the family who needed it more. They represented hunger, poverty, and making do with what little you had. At Woolworth's, they represented the absolute bottom of the menu, the cheapest item you could order, and still sit at the lunch counter with dignity, still be served by a waitress, still eat from a real plate with real silverware. That sense of dignity mattered deeply to people who had very little else. By the 1990s, a 20-cent sandwich was unthinkable, incomprehensible, a price so low that it seemed like a typo or a joke. The lettuce and tomato sandwich had become a relic, remembered only by those who had lived through true economic hardship, through the Depression or wartime rationing, or the lean years of the 1970s. When Woolworths closed in 1997, the 20-cent sandwich disappeared with it, and sandwiches made with ingredients you could recognize and pronounce. The prices seem impossible now. 20 cents for a sandwich, 65 cents for a full turkey dinner, 99 cents for roast beef with gravy and mashed potatoes. But those prices were real, and so was the food. Nothing came from a microwave. Nothing was pre-packaged or mass-produced in a factory 1,000 miles away. The cooks arrived at 5 in the morning to roast the beef, bake the ham, fry the chicken, and simmer the gravy. The waitresses knew your name, remembered how you liked your coffee, and called you honey without irony.